Would you give up your lifeline just because the rules said so? That was the question Ryan Walker kept turning over in his mind as he sat in the cramped, echoing courtroom, Duke's head resting on his knee, the dog's breath warm against his trembling fingers. Outside, a summer thunderstorm rolled over the city, rattling the windows with distant booms and drenching the courthouse steps. But inside, the air felt even heavier. This wasn't just a legal fight. It was the end of everything that had kept him alive. People think the hardest goodbyes happen in airports or on battlefields, but sometimes they happen under flickering fluorescent lights, surrounded by strangers who have no idea what's at stake. The judge, a tall, unsmiling woman with deep lines carved around her mouth, sat behind the high wooden bench, papers stacked in neat piles before her. An army lawyer in a crisp uniform, every button gleaming, shuffled through files as if what happened here was routine, another day at the office. But nothing about this day was routine for Ryan. His whole world was sitting at his feet. A German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes, eyes that had seen more war than most men. Duke had been more than a partner. He was the one steady thread running through all of Ryan's broken nights and battered mornings. Now the army said Duke wasn't his to keep. The military needed him for a new mission, some classified detail. Rules were rules, the government's lawyer had explained. Duke is government property, Sergeant Walker. You know the protocol. Ryan swallowed hard. His hands clenched around Duke's collar. His mind flickered through memories. Sand whipping his face in Afghanistan. Bombs shaking the ground. And always Duke, always alert. Sniffing out IEDs, warning of ambushes, nudging Ryan's elbow when the nightmares got too real. Even now Duke pressed close, steady as a rock, as if he could sense the storm brewing inside Ryan's chest. The judge called for order, her voice ringing out sharp and clear. Sergeant Walker, you may speak. There was a hush in the courtroom, the kind that comes before a verdict or a gunshot. Ryan stood, legs trembling, every eye on him. Your Honor, he began, but his voice cracked. He took a breath, squeezed Duke's fur for courage, and tried again. Your Honor, with all due respect, I know what the rules say. I know what the Army says, but you need to understand. Duke isn't just a dog to me. He's not just a piece of equipment. He's my lifeline. He saved my life overseas, and he saved it a dozen times since I got home. He scanned the room. The gallery was packed with veterans, families, court officials, and a few bored reporters scribbling notes. A woman in the back dabbed at her eyes. Ryan caught her gaze and felt a surge of solidarity, a reminder that some people in this room knew what it was to lose more than a court case. When I got back from my third deployment, Ryan continued, I didn't recognize myself. Couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe sometimes. I'd see things, hear things that weren't there, except to me they were real. I started drinking, started shutting out my family. I came close to ending it all, more times than I want to admit. But Duke, he knew. He'd jump on the bed, lick my face, pull me back. He was trained for combat, but he saved me in peacetime too. A murmur rippled through the spectators, and the army lawyer started to rise, but the judge lifted a hand. Let him finish. Ryan took another breath. I know you have to follow orders. I know there's a chain of command, but some things, some bonds, you can't just sign away. If you take Duke from me, you're not just taking a dog. You're taking away my reason to get up every day, my hope. Please, I'm begging you. Don't let protocol take the place of what's right. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Even the bailiff, a heavy-set man with tattoos snaking up his arm, stared at Ryan with a strange mix of sympathy and helplessness. Duke, sensing the tension, looked up at Ryan and licked his hand. A simple gesture loaded with loyalty. The judge leaned forward, her face softening just a fraction. "Sergeant Walker, I hear what you're saying, but the law is clear." At that moment, a low, guttural growl rolled from Duke's chest. Ryan glanced down, startled. Duke was staring at the courtroom doors, ears pricked, body tense. Ryan felt the old surge of adrenaline, the same one that had kept him alive in firefights. Duke only ever acted like this when something was very wrong. Someone in the gallery laughed nervously. The Army lawyer frowned, ready to protest. But Ryan's heart hammered in his chest. He recognized that look in Duke's eyes. The battle readiness. The silent warning. For a second, the courtroom and its rules faded, replaced by the hard lessons of war. Trust your dog. But the judge, caught up in the law and its boundaries, didn't see what Ryan saw. She only saw a soldier and his service animal, a case to be decided, a protocol to be enforced. Yet beneath the surface, the battle lines were being drawn, not just between man and government, but between survival and surrender, between dignity and bureaucracy. As thunder boomed outside and the lights flickered, Ryan squeezed Duke's shoulder. "I'm not giving up on you, buddy," he whispered. "Not now, not ever." And in that storm-tossed courtroom, surrounded by strangers and rules and the threat of loss, Ryan Walker and Duke stood together, warriors against the world, refusing to be separated, not by law, not by fear, not by anything. As Ryan's final words echoed through the hushed courtroom, the tension in the air was nearly suffocating. The judge leaned back in her chair, deliberating, her eyes searching Ryan's face for something. Maybe regret, maybe hope, maybe just the right answer to a problem with no easy solution. Meanwhile, the Army lawyer sat rigid, glancing between his notes and the German shepherd who now stood bristling at Ryan's side. Suddenly, Duke's growl deepened, reverberating across the room like a warning siren. His fur stood on end, tail rigid, and his body coiled as if ready to spring. The change was so immediate, so total, that even the judge's gavel hand froze in midair. A chill shot through Ryan, old instincts kicking in. He'd seen this look before, in Afghanistan, in alleyways where the shadows moved, where a split second's hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. "Easy, Duke. Easy, boy," Ryan whispered. But Duke's eyes never left the double doors at the back of the courtroom. A bailiff, more used to shushing noisy lawyers than facing danger, frowned and strode to the doors. "Probably someone just arriving late," he muttered, reaching for the handle. But Duke's barking exploded, echoing off the marble columns, sharp and furious. The sound was primal, terrifying in its intensity. He lunged toward the door, nearly pulling Ryan with him. The entire room erupted in chaos. The judge jumped to her feet. The Army lawyer dropped his papers, startled. Reporters in the gallery scrambled for their cameras. "Order!" the judge shouted. But the word was swallowed by Duke's insistent barks and the collective panic rising from the spectators. Ryan's heart pounded. He didn't see a dog out of control. He saw a partner, a soldier giving a warning that couldn't be ignored. "Listen," Ryan shouted, his voice desperate. "He's not like other dogs. He's trained for this. Something's wrong." The judge hesitated, caught between protocol and the immediate fear gripping the courtroom. "Sergeant Walker, restrain your dog," she commanded. But Ryan shook his head. "You don't understand. Duke only acts like this when he senses real danger. Please, Your Honor, you have to trust him." But the bailiff, hand still on the door, rolled his eyes. "He's just spooked, that's all. You're making a scene, Sergeant." He swung open the doors. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The doors burst open, slamming against the walls. A shadowy figure, face obscured by a hood, rushed forward, flanked by two others with hard eyes and gloved fists. Duke lunged, barking with the authority of 100 alarms. "Get the dog!" one of the intruders barked. His voice was cold, flat, military maybe, or just hardened by a life of command. Panic gripped the gallery. People screamed, ducking behind benches. The army lawyer scrambled for cover, and the judge shouted for security, her voice cracking for the first time. The bailiff fumbled for his radio, calling for backup. Two police officers in the hallway rushed to the scene, hands flying to their holsters. Duke surged forward, placing himself between Ryan and the intruders. Ryan's training flashed through his mind. Never freeze, never leave your partner. Without thinking, he stepped in front of Duke, bracing himself for whatever was about to happen. The hooded leader sneered. "Move aside, soldier. We're only here for the dog. He's not yours. He's never been yours." Ryan's fists clenched. "You're not taking him." The taller intruder reached into his jacket. A glint of metal flashed. The police shouted, "Freeze!" and chaos erupted. The courtroom became a battleground. People cowering, officers shouting commands, the judge's face white with shock, and Duke, unwavering, teeth bared, ready to defend. One of the armed men advanced, grabbing for Duke's leash. In a heartbeat, Duke twisted away, knocking the man back, teeth snapping with military precision. Ryan shouted, "Back off! He'll protect himself!" Gunshots echoed. One, then two. Shouts rang out. A window shattered as a bullet ricocheted, glass spraying across the courtroom floor. Duke's bark never faltered. Ryan pulled him back, his own body a shield. The attackers hesitated, outnumbered as more officers arrived, weapons drawn. "On the ground, now!" a police sergeant barked, voice cracking like a whip. The lead intruder snarled, shooting a glare at Ryan. "You have no idea what you're doing. He belongs to us." But he and his men retreated, slipping through the chaos as the officers closed in. Ryan's legs shook, adrenaline burning through him. All around, people were crying, whispering, trembling in shock. The judge slumped in her seat, face buried in her hands. Only Duke remained steady, pressed close to Ryan's leg, chest heaving but eyes alert. It was over, for now. But Ryan knew something fundamental had shifted. The courtroom was no longer a place of law and order, but a battleground where his bond with Duke was threatened by forces far bigger than paperwork or rules. As officers secured the room and tended to the shaken witnesses, Ryan knelt and pressed his forehead to Duke's. "You saved us again, buddy," he murmured, fighting back tears, just like always. The judge's voice was ragged as she ordered a recess, her gaze fixed on Ryan and Duke. "This court is adjourned until further notice." As the room slowly emptied, Ryan realized the army wasn't his only enemy anymore. Someone else wanted Duke, badly, and they were willing to do whatever it took. But as long as he had Duke at his side, Ryan wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The courtroom was chaos, sirens wailing in the distance, police radios crackling with frantic voices, officers moving to secure every entrance and exit. But Ryan barely registered any of it. His mind was spiraling back, far from the polished wood and marble columns of the courthouse, back to a time when life and death were as close as his next breath. The smell of gunpowder and fear wasn't just a memory. It was right here with him, as real as Duke's fur against his shaking hand. Ryan squeezed his eyes shut, heart pounding, letting himself be pulled into the memories that refused to stay buried. It was always the same: heat, dust, and the thrum of danger. Afghanistan, 2013. His platoon had been on patrol near a dusty crossroads outside Kandahar, the sun an unforgiving hammer overhead. Every step had been a gamble. Locals eyed them from doorways, faces shadowed, unreadable. Then there was Duke, alert, his powerful frame tense, nose to the wind, every muscle telegraphing. Something's wrong. The world went silent, just for a second. Then an explosion ripped the air apart, shattering bone and earth, slamming Ryan hard into the sand. He remembered the deafening ring, the chaos, the screaming, the fire. He remembered Duke, somehow unhurt, scrambling to his side, licking blood and dirt from his face, dragging him by the sleeve away from the burning Humvee. Ryan had lost consciousness, but not before he saw Duke standing between him and the flames, barking until help came. The next few weeks were a blur. Hospitals, surgeries, therapists talking about recovery, as if putting a name to it made it easier. But it wasn't just his body that was broken. It was his mind, too. Nights brought flashes of light, the roar of explosions, the memory of friends lost. More than once, Ryan found himself on the floor, sweat-soaked, gasping for breath, certain the enemy was just outside his door. But Duke was always there, no matter what. In the hospital, Duke curled up at his side, one paw resting on Ryan's chest as if anchoring him to the world. When Ryan shook with rage or terror, Duke pressed close, a living shield against the darkness. On the worst days, when the world seemed hollow and pointless, Duke would bring him a chew toy, tail wagging, insisting that there was still something worth living for. Ryan remembered a night not long after returning home. The city was silent, except for the distant sound of trains. He'd been drinking, trying to drown the nightmares, but nothing worked. The walls felt like they were closing in. He'd picked up his old service pistol, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. One press of the trigger, and all the pain would end. But Duke had seen. The dog pawed at his arm, whined softly, then laid his head in Ryan's lap, looking up with those steady, unwavering eyes. Duke didn't bark or panic. He just stayed, refusing to move until Ryan dropped the pistol and buried his face in Duke's neck, sobbing, clutching at the only thing keeping him here. Trust your dog. That was what the army had drilled into every handler, not just on patrol, but in every moment of danger. Dogs sensed things people missed, the scent of explosives, the edge of panic, the first spark of hope. They were more than tools, they were partners, lifelines. The courtroom faded back into focus. Ryan opened his eyes, breathing hard, sweat slick on his palms. Duke was still there, head held high, eyes tracking every movement in the chaotic room. He wasn't barking now, just alert, ready. Ryan stroked the dog's back, steadying himself. Somewhere nearby, 2 police officers were speaking in urgent whispers. The judge paced near her bench, visibly shaken, her robes askew. A paramedic checked over an elderly woman who'd fainted during the attack. In the midst of it all, Duke was calm, the eye of the storm. Ryan caught the army lawyer staring at him, suspicion in his eyes. "Is this what you call a service animal, Sergeant Walker? Putting everyone at risk?" Ryan's temper flared. "You have no idea what risk is. You sit behind a desk and quote rules. Duke has pulled me from burning vehicles, found IEDs before they could kill anyone, stopped me from ending my own life. What have you ever risked?" The lawyer bristled, but before he could respond, the judge intervened. "Enough! This isn't helping anyone." She sat down heavily, massaging her temples. "Sergeant Walker, tell me honestly, do you believe Duke's alert was justified? Was there really danger?" Ryan met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Yes, ma'am. I'd bet my life on it. I have, more times than I can count. He's trained to sense things nobody else can. That's why you trust the dog, even when you don't trust yourself." The judge looked at Duke, studying the dog's calm authority, the way he watched over Ryan. For a moment, The room was quiet, just the soft sound of Duke's breathing. A young woman in the gallery, maybe a military spouse, maybe just someone who understood, stood and spoke, her voice shaking. "Your Honor, we owe people like him better than this. That dog is the only reason Sergeant Walker made it home. He's not just a piece of equipment. He's family." A ripple of agreement swept through the room. Ryan felt his throat tighten, gratitude and pain twisting together. The Army lawyer said nothing, just shuffled his notes. But Ryan knew the fight was far from over. As the courthouse slowly settled, Ryan realized this was more than a legal battle. It was a fight for dignity, for survival, for the right to hold on to the one thing that had never let him down. Whatever came next, Ryan and Duke would face it together. Because a dog isn't just a dog. Sometimes, he's your only lifeline. After the chaos, the courtroom felt strange, too quiet, as if everyone was waiting for another explosion. The judge called a recess, her gavel landing with a hollow thud that echoed in the high-ceilinged chamber. Police officers hustled the few remaining reporters out, their radios squawking with updates about the assailants who had almost breached the sanctuary of law and order. But for Ryan, the world had shrunk to the space between him and Duke, to the gentle pressure of the dog's side against his leg and the wariness in Duke's amber eyes. Outside, rain hammered the courthouse steps, running in rivers along the sidewalk. Inside, whispers flowed even faster, hushed voices of doubt, confusion, and judgment. "Maybe that dog's too dangerous. Didn't you see the way he lunged? How can he be safe for anyone?" Ryan heard it all, every sideways glance and muttered comment. He clenched his fists, knuckles whitening, fighting the urge to shout. If only people understood. Duke's aggression was never random, never cruel. It was purpose. It was training. It was life or death. The judge remained at her bench, rubbing the bridge of her nose, deep in thought. The Army lawyer retreated to a corner, phone pressed to his ear, murmuring about containment and chain of custody. Across the room, a bailiff wiped sweat from his brow, the memory of gunfire and panic still fresh in his eyes. Ryan took a shaky breath and tried to explain, for what felt like the 100th time, what Duke's training really meant. "Your Honor," he called out, his voice raw but steady. "I know what you saw looked intense, but you have to realize, Duke is a trained military working dog. He doesn't react unless there's a real threat. He was trying to protect everyone here, not attack." The judge looked at him, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. "But Sergeant Walker, how can we know the difference? To most people, that's just a dog barking and lunging. They don't see the line between protection and danger." Ryan nodded, shoulders sagging. "I get it. It's not easy. But when we were overseas, Duke was the difference between going home and never making it back. If he barked, if he growled, you listened. You never questioned it, even if it meant changing course or stopping the convoy for an hour in a sandstorm. He saved lives, dozens of times, because we trusted his instincts over the standard procedure." A heavy silence hung in the air. The whispers returned, mingling with the distant rumbles of thunder. A reporter, face pale and eyes wide, scribbled in her notebook. Some people in the gallery looked away, but others, especially the veterans, watched Ryan and Duke with newfound respect. Duke lay down at Ryan's feet, but his body remained tense, muscles coiled. His eyes flickered constantly to the courtroom door, his nose twitching. Ryan reached down, fingers tangling in Duke's fur, desperate for some of the dog's steady courage to rub off on him. "You're a good boy," he whispered. "You've always known what to do, even when I didn't." He looked around at the courthouse staff, saw the doubt and suspicion there, and felt a crushing wave of despair. Was this what it meant to come home? To have your sacrifices second-guessed? Your lifeline threatened by red tape and misunderstanding? The army lawyer approached the bench again, voice low but urgent. Your Honor, we need to consider the bigger picture. Sergeant Walker's emotional attachment is understandable, but Duke is government property. He's trained for combat situations. He's not a family pet. If his aggression can't be controlled, we're risking public safety. Ryan's patience snapped. He's not a danger to the public, he shot back. He's saved more people than you can imagine. He's the reason I'm still here. The reason any of my squad is still here. All he wants is to stay with me, to do his job. The judge sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose again. Everyone, let's take a recess. Sergeant Walker, please remain in the courtroom. I need to consider all sides before making any decision. The room emptied, leaving Ryan and Duke in a cavernous silence broken only by the rain and Duke's restless breathing. Ryan sank onto a wooden bench, head in his hands. He felt utterly alone, surrounded by law and doubt, his future hanging by a thread. A few minutes later, the judge returned with 2 police officers. She stood in front of Ryan, her expression tired but sincere. I want to understand, Sergeant. Talk to me, not as a judge, but as a person. What does Duke's behavior mean to you? Ryan looked up, eyes burning. It means everything. When Duke's on alert, I listen, no matter what. It saved lives before, and it saved lives today. But it's not just about danger. When I wake up at night, sweating and shaking, he's there. He senses it before I do. Sometimes, he nudges me awake before I even have a nightmare. He's the only one who gets it, who doesn't judge, who doesn't care about rank or paperwork. Just being near him, it's the only thing that feels normal anymore. The judge's voice softened. You're saying Duke is more than a dog to you. Ryan nodded, unable to speak. She glanced at Duke, who gazed back with steady, intelligent eyes. I need time to think, but I promise I'll consider everything you've said. As she left, Ryan felt hope flicker, fragile but real. Duke pressed closer, as if to say, we're not done yet. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, so did Ryan's fight. Not just for his dog, but for his dignity, for understanding, for the chance to be seen as more than a case file or a risk. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. As long as Duke was by his side, he wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. The storm outside had finally eased, but the tension inside the courthouse only seemed to grow thicker by the minute. After the judge left, Ryan sat on the bench with Duke at his feet, both of them silent but watchful. It felt like every eye in the building was on them, whether out of suspicion or simple curiosity. Ryan was exhausted, nerves frayed from the confrontation and the relentless uncertainty that clung to every moment since he'd walked in. Yet Duke was still on edge, ears twitching at every sound, eyes darting to the doorway, the windows, the shadows shifting in every corner. Then the atmosphere changed. The front doors to the courthouse creaked open with a metallic groan that made even the most jaded bailiff flinch. 3 figures entered, moving with the slow, measured steps of men who didn't need to rush or explain themselves to anyone. The leader wore a gray hood pulled low over his face, hiding his features except for the line of his jaw. His 2 companions were broader, dressed in dark jackets, each with a hand kept suspiciously close to their sides. Men used to carrying weapons. Duke was the first to react. He didn't bark, not at first, just stood up abruptly, hackles raised, every muscle coiled as if he'd been shocked with electricity. Ryan immediately recognized the shift. This was Duke's combat mode, the alert he'd seen dozens of times overseas, right before everything went sideways. Ryan put a hand on Duke's collar and stood up, blocking the dog from the strangers. The lead intruder walked straight toward him, boots echoing across the polished floor. "We're not here to hurt anyone," the man said, voice low, calm, with the unmistakable chill of authority. "We just want the dog. You know why. He's special, valuable. The Army's right. He was never really yours." Ryan felt a surge of anger so sharp it almost made him dizzy. He squared his shoulders, planting himself in front of Duke. "He's not going anywhere with you. If you want him, you'll have to go through me. And the police." Ryan gestured toward the nearby security officers, who now stood alert, hands resting on their sidearms, but the hooded man just smirked. "We don't want trouble, Sergeant Walker. Think about it. Hand over the dog, and this ends quietly. He was trained for bigger things than babysitting a broken vet. Or do you really believe you're the only one who needs him?" Ryan's fists clenched. "Duke's not property. He's family, and he's saved more lives than you ever will. I don't care what your orders are. You're not taking him." The man's expression turned cold. "We gave you a chance." He motioned to his companions, who began to advance. Duke erupted into furious barking, lunging at the men, teeth bared. The sudden noise snapped the entire lobby into motion. Bailiffs shouting, courthouse staff diving for cover, a flurry of panic spreading through the building. One of the intruders pulled out a small black device, an electronic prod or possibly something worse, and advanced. The other reached into his jacket. In a split second, the lobby became a standoff. Duke straining at the leash, Ryan standing his ground, the security officers with guns drawn, everyone shouting over each other. "Drop it! Drop whatever's in your hand," a bailiff barked, his weapon trained on the nearest attacker. The hooded leader raised his empty hands, feigning innocence. "You're making a mistake, Walker. He doesn't belong to you. You know that deep down." The threat in his words was unmistakable, and Ryan felt the old battle nerves fire up. He wasn't just fighting for his dog anymore. He was fighting for his own agency, his own dignity. All around him, fear and chaos erupted. The police moved in, but the hooded man and his crew were careful, never fully exposing themselves, always keeping their hands visible except for quick, subtle movements. Duke barked with a force that made the windows rattle. Ryan saw the police sergeant step between them and the intruders, weapon drawn and voice shaking with the adrenaline of a real threat. "This is your last warning. Back away from the dog!" The hooded man stopped, eyes narrow. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "The Army doesn't care about your feelings, Walker, and neither do we. That dog's coming with us, one way or another." For a split second, the entire lobby hung in the balance, one wrong move away from total disaster. Ryan's pulse hammered in his ears, but he didn't back down. He placed himself between Duke and the attackers, determined to protect the only creature who'd never let him down. Then sirens blared outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the courthouse windows. More police surged in, weapons drawn, shouting orders. The three intruders backed toward the door, the leader never breaking eye contact with Ryan. "This isn't over," he promised, then turned and vanished into the pouring rain, his men close behind. As the doors slammed shut, Ryan finally let out the breath he'd been holding. Duke, still tense, pressed his head against Ryan's thigh, seeking reassurance. Ryan knelt and wrapped his arms around Duke's thick neck, burying his face in the dog's fur. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered, voice ragged with relief and fear. "I've got you. They'll have to go through me first." All around, the courthouse staff emerged from hiding, faces pale and shaken, The police chief pulled Ryan aside, voice urgent. "We'll post guards. You and your dog. You're not going anywhere until we figure out who those men are. Someone's after Duke, and we need to know why." Ryan nodded, exhausted but resolute. He could feel the weight of every gaze, some doubting, some sympathetic, but he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was that Duke was still with him, still alive, still fighting. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a new battle had begun, but for the first time Ryan knew he wasn't alone. As long as he had Duke, he had something worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The courthouse lobby was a war zone. The scent of rain mingled with fear, adrenaline, and the acrid tang of sweat as police officers barked orders, weapons drawn. Bailiffs scrambled to cordon off civilians and courthouse staff. Ryan's world narrowed to a tunnel. Just him, Duke, and the three intruders. Each movement now a calculated risk, every word loaded with tension. The leader of the intruders, his gray hood now soaked and clinging to his face, stared Ryan down, his gaze flat and predatory. The two men beside him flanked out, their jackets bulging in ways that sent alarm bells screaming through Ryan's mind. He recognized the posture, the way a trained operator moves when he's prepared for violence but holding back for something bigger. The air shimmered with anticipation. Like the moment before a firefight breaks loose, police officers shouted warnings, hands firm on their holstered sidearms. "Stay where you are! Keep your hands visible!" the police sergeant called, voice hoarse but commanding. The hooded man ignored the cops. "We're not here for anyone but the dog," he said coldly, voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Hand him over, now. Nobody else has to get hurt." One of his men flicked a glance at Duke, then at Ryan, a quick, silent calculation. Duke stood between Ryan and the attackers, every muscle quivering, teeth bared, his growl a low thunder in the chaos. Ryan held his ground, chest heaving. He forced himself to remember his training, control your breathing, scan for exits, count the threats. But his eyes kept darting to Duke. The dog's focus was absolute, locked on the men threatening his handler. Ryan knelt beside him, hand gripping Duke's collar. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, knowing any sign of fear could tip the balance. The judge's voice trembled from the top of the marble stairs. "Someone call for backup! Get these men out!" But the hooded leader cut her off. "No one needs to get hurt if you do as we say. This dog belongs to the United States Army, and by extension, to us." He flashed a piece of laminated paper, some kind of badge or credentials, but it meant nothing to Ryan. If anything, it looked fake. "Step aside," Ryan bristled. "If you want him, you'll have to come through me and every law enforcement officer in this building." His voice rang out, defiant. "He's not property. He's my partner." Duke, as if sensing the escalation, barked, a deep, explosive warning that vibrated through the room. The sound stopped everyone in their tracks. The bailiffs stepped in, spreading out to form a barrier between the intruders and Ryan. The police officers closed ranks, guns raised but fingers steady. The room felt like a live wire. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating. Ryan's heart hammered, his vision narrowing to the men in front of him. He could hear his own breath, Duke's rapid panting, and the far-off wail of sirens growing louder. Then the standoff snapped. One of the intruders lunged, hand darting inside his jacket. The nearest bailiff dove, tackling him hard, both men crashing into a row of courtroom benches. The second attacker swung at a police officer, who dodged and cracked the man across the head with his baton. The hooded leader advanced on Ryan and Duke, brandishing a small taser. "Last chance, hand him over," he snarled. Ryan didn't move. He positioned himself between the taser and Duke, muscles tense, every nerve screaming for action. Duke snapped, teeth flashing, forcing the attacker to jump back. "You're not taking him?" Ryan shouted, voice raw. The standoff erupted. Two police officers piled onto the second intruder, wrestling him to the floor. The first attacker squirmed beneath the bailiff's knee, cursing. The leader tried to push past Ryan, but Duke lunged, catching his arm in powerful jaws. The man shrieked, dropping the taser as he struggled to free himself. Ryan seized the moment, grabbing the taser and flinging it aside. "Get down," he ordered, as more officers rushed in. The leader managed to wrench himself free, blood on his sleeve, and darted toward the doors, his crew stumbling behind him. The officers gave chase, but the three men vanished into the wet, gray world outside, swallowed by the storm. In the aftermath, the lobby was a mess of overturned chairs, broken glass, and terrified witnesses. The judge was pale but resolute, barking orders for a lockdown. The police sergeant rushed to Ryan's side. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling to check Duke for injuries. Ryan shook, adrenaline surging, but nodded. Duke's fur was matted with sweat and blood, but his eyes were clear, steady, and proud. "He's okay," Ryan said hoarsely. "He saved me, again." The sergeant clapped Ryan's shoulder. "We'll get statements. Lock this place down. No one's taking your dog, not while I'm here." As law enforcement cleared the scene, Ryan slumped to the ground, pulling Duke close. "You did good, boy," he whispered, voice cracking. Around them, support grew. Some officers knelt to pet Duke. Others murmured admiration. Even the judge approached, eyes red-rimmed but steady. "This isn't over, Sergeant Walker," she said softly. "But today, you and Duke reminded us what loyalty really means." Ryan felt the fatigue crash over him. He knew the danger wasn't gone. The intruder's warning still rang in his ears. "He belongs to us. This isn't over." But as long as Duke was by his side, Ryan felt ready for whatever came next. They'd stood their ground, two soldiers against the world, refusing to surrender, no matter the odds. Outside, the rain slowed to a gentle patter, and for the first time in hours, Ryan let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd see the dawn together. The storm outside had faded to a drizzle, but inside the courthouse, the chaos from the standoff still echoed through every corridor and chamber. The building was now swarming with uniformed officers and plainclothes detectives. Evidence bags appeared on benches, radios chirped nonstop, and the halls were thick with a mixture of fear and determination. For Ryan, everything felt oddly surreal, like he was floating above his own life, watching events play out with a sense of exhaustion and disbelief. Duke, too, was a different dog in the aftermath, still vigilant, but his energy now edged with exhaustion. He lay beside Ryan as the paramedics checked them both over. "He's a hell of a partner," one medic murmured, glancing at Duke's bandaged foreleg. "Tough as they come. You're lucky, man." Ryan nodded. "I know," he said quietly as he stroked Duke's head. "He's the reason I'm still standing." He looked around at the police, the press, and the handful of veterans who lingered near the edges of the commotion. Their eyes filled with a grim understanding. Detective Simmons, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, approached with a notepad. "Mr. Walker, can I have a word?" Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were all business. Ryan followed her to a quiet corner, Duke trailing close. "We're running checks on the men who attacked you," Simmons explained. "The ID your main guy flashed was fake. They moved like pros. We've got officers canvassing the area and security footage from every angle. But I'll be honest, it feels bigger than a simple dog theft. You know why someone would want Duke so badly?" Ryan hesitated, then said, "He's not just a regular service dog. Duke's been through advanced military training, bomb detection, combat scenarios, threat assessment. The kind of stuff only a handful of dogs ever master. Whoever's after him knows exactly what he's capable of. Simmons nodded, jotting notes. There's a market for military dogs. Black market, I mean. They're worth a fortune to the wrong people. Organized crime, private militias, even foreign actors. People who don't care about the law or who gets hurt along the way. But these men seemed personal. You recognize them from anywhere? Old deployments, enemies? Ryan shook his head. No, but I've made enemies. Sometimes you don't even know their faces. All I know is Duke's not going anywhere with them. Not while I'm alive. Simmons looked at him for a long moment, then placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. We're putting you both under protection until this is over. You'll be safe here. And I promise, we're going to find out who's behind this. Word of the attempted theft spread fast. By the time Ryan was escorted to a temporary safe room, thick concrete walls, a cot, bottled water, and a chair for the judge, who insisted on staying nearby. News vans had already gathered outside, satellite dishes angled toward the courthouse. A photo of Ryan shielding Duke during the standoff flashed across every screen. Veteran and service dog targeted by armed attackers, heroic standoff inside courthouse. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Local veteran groups mobilized, flooding social media with support for Ryan and Duke. The hashtag #LetDukeStay trended nationwide. Messages poured in. Fellow soldiers, families of service members, dog lovers, even strangers who'd never met a working animal but understood what loyalty looked like. "We stand with you, Sergeant Walker," someone wrote. "No dog left behind." A television crew requested an interview, and though Ryan was hesitant, the judge encouraged him. "Let the world see what this is really about," she said. "People need to understand that dogs like Duke are more than tools. They're partners, family." So Ryan sat down for the cameras, Duke at his side, his hands never leaving the dog's shoulders. Under the glare of studio lights, he spoke about his time in the service, about how Duke had saved him in ways no medication or therapist ever could. He described Duke's courage, his intelligence, the silent language they shared, a language forged in fire and fear, and trust stronger than steel. When you've been to the edge, sometimes the only thing that keeps you here is knowing someone depends on you. Duke did that for me. He's not just a dog, he's my lifeline. The interview went viral. Messages of support flooded the police department's inbox. Donations poured into local K-9 veteran organizations, and a petition to keep Duke with Ryan gathered tens of thousands of signatures overnight. But as the outpouring of love and support grew, so did the threat. Detective Simmons returned with an update. Grim-faced, her notepad clutched tight. "We traced one of the attackers to a criminal syndicate tied to illegal animal trafficking and weapons sales. We think they wanted Duke for his training, and maybe to keep him out of your hands, for reasons we're still digging into." Ryan felt cold all over. "So this isn't just about me," he said. "It's about anyone who stands up for what's right." Simmons nodded. "We're doing everything we can, but you need to be careful. Don't go anywhere without protection." The judge made her position clear in a statement to the press. "The safety and dignity of our veterans and their service animals is not negotiable. We will not be intimidated." As night fell and the courthouse grew quiet, Ryan sat on the cot, his back against the concrete wall. Duke curled up at his feet. The storm clouds were gone, but danger still hung in the air. Ryan couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts. Too much fear for what might come next. But every time doubt tried to creep in, Duke pressed closer, warm and steady, a living promise that no matter what happened, they would face it together. Across the country, people were waking up to their story, A fight for dignity, for loyalty, for the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his dog. Ryan knew the battle was far from over, but for the first time he didn't feel alone. And in the darkness, he whispered, "Whatever comes next, we'll handle it, buddy. You and me. Always." The world outside seemed to move faster now, like the storm that had battered the courthouse was still echoing in every phone call, news report, and anxious face. Ryan barely slept that night, even with the courthouse under police lockdown and a state trooper stationed at every door. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the flash of the taser, heard the cold voice of the hooded man, or relived the way Duke pressed against him, as if the dog could absorb the fear right out of his chest. Morning brought a new routine, constant phone calls from reporters, veterans groups, and even members of Congress. The courthouse was a fortress, but Ryan knew the real battle wasn't behind concrete walls anymore. It was out there, in the headlines, and on every screen, in every home where people were waking up to his story. The judge called Ryan into her chambers, where coffee steamed in paper cups and legal files littered every inch of the desk. Her voice was weary but determined. The Department of Defense wants Duke transferred to a secure facility. They're citing national security concerns. The Army is threatening to escalate if we don't comply. Ryan shook his head, anger simmering beneath his exhaustion. They don't care about Duke. They care about rules, about paperwork. He's not a bomb. He's not a gun. He's a living, breathing being, and he's my partner. If they take him, they're destroying the only thing keeping me together. The judge leaned forward, her eyes meeting his. This isn't just about you anymore, Sergeant Walker. The whole country's watching. You have a chance to show them why this matters. Not just for you, but for every veteran, every service dog, every person who's ever depended on someone or something to survive. That was all Ryan needed. He reached out to the local VFW, to every organization he could find that worked with service animals, and told his story over and over again. He spoke to the press in front of the courthouse, holding Duke's leash, his voice carrying over the crowd. Duke is not property. He's not equipment. He's the reason I came home and the reason I stayed alive. There are thousands of veterans out there just like me, and thousands of dogs who've saved lives. Taking them away for bureaucracy or money is wrong, plain and simple. His words struck a nerve. TV crews camped outside the courthouse, and talk shows debated the issue. A hashtag, #DukesLaw, began trending as people shared their own stories of dogs and loyalty and invisible wounds. Ryan received messages from parents who had lost sons and daughters overseas, from soldiers who wrote about how their service animals pulled them back from the brink, from people who never knew such a bond could exist until they saw his interview. But not everyone was supportive. Trolls filled his inbox with threats and hate, accusing him of putting one dog above national security, of being selfish or unstable. The Army issued a statement calling Duke valuable government property and warning that emotions couldn't override legal obligations. The head of the local police union spoke on television, questioning whether Ryan was fit to care for a combat-trained animal in civilian life. The pressure mounted. Duke's fate was still in the balance, and so was Ryan's sense of hope. But he kept going, meeting with lawyers, filming TikToks and interviews, sharing everything. He held a candlelight vigil on the courthouse steps, standing alongside other veterans and their dogs. For every life saved, for every nightmare eased, for every day made possible, he said to the crowd, "These animals are family. We don't leave family behind." The night was thick with emotion. Old soldiers, tough as nails, wept as they hugged their dogs. Young activists marched with homemade signs. Loyalty over law, service not for sale, heroes deserve better. Even the judge, standing at the edge of the crowd, wiped away a tear as Ryan knelt beside Duke, the candlelight flickering in the dog's steady, wise eyes. Stories from across the country poured in. An ex-Marine from Texas whose Labrador warned him before a seizure. A Gold Star widow in Ohio whose therapy dog slept beside her through every sleepless night. A firefighter from New Jersey who credited his K9 with dragging him from a burning building. Ryan posted each one, refusing to let the issue fade. A turning point came when a retired general appeared on national television and spoke out. "We train these animals to save lives, and then we call them property. That's not who we are. We owe it to every man and woman who ever wore the uniform to do better." His words sparked a flurry of debate in Congress, where lawmakers began drafting what the press now called Duke's Law, a bill that would give priority to handlers in all military dog retirements. But the threat still lingered. Detective Simmons briefed Ryan on the latest findings. The group that targeted Duke is part of a larger syndicate. They're desperate. They may try again. Ryan nodded grimly, keeping Duke close at all times, his eyes scanning every shadow. But he refused to hide. The battle was no longer just for Duke, but for every veteran and service dog team threatened by bureaucracy, greed, or ignorance. One morning, Ryan sat at a long table with his lawyer, the judge, and a row of government officials. He looked them each in the eye. "I won't stop fighting. I won't back down. Duke's life matters, and so does mine. You can take everything else, but you can't take our dignity." As the session ended, a small crowd waited outside the courthouse, cheering and waving flags. Duke trotted beside Ryan, his wounds healing, his spirit undimmed. The battle was fierce, the future uncertain, but Ryan felt a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a fighter, a leader, a voice for all those who'd been told to give up their lifeline in the name of rules. And as Duke looked up at him, eyes full of trust and gratitude, Ryan knew he'd never stop fighting. Not as long as loyalty, love, and dignity were still worth defending. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Ryan barely recognized his own life anymore. Each day, a new news crew at his door, another interview, another call from a politician's office, another flood of emails from people whose lives had been changed by a dog like Duke. The courthouse showdown had struck a nerve that ran deeper than he ever could have imagined, uniting Americans across backgrounds, ages, and politics around a simple, powerful idea. You don't abandon those who serve, no matter what form that service takes. But the fight was far from over. Despite public pressure, Duke's fate was still uncertain. The Army's lawyers kept filing appeals. The criminal syndicate that had targeted Duke was still out there, lurking in the background. And for every encouraging message Ryan received, there was a fresh wave of doubt, threats, and bureaucratic pushback. So when Ryan was invited to speak at the National Veterans Summit in Washington, D.C., he wasn't sure he was ready. "I'm not a public speaker," he told Detective Simmons, who was now both his protector and friend. "I'm just a guy who loves his dog." She grinned. "That's exactly why you need to speak, Ryan. People believe you because you're real. You and Duke, your story is changing things." Traveling to the summit was no small feat. The police detail was tighter than ever. Duke wore a bulletproof vest, and Ryan felt the eyes of every officer on him as he made his way through security. The massive auditorium was packed. Veterans from every branch, Gold Star families, lawmakers, generals, activists, reporters. Banners hung overhead. "Honor our heroes," all of them. As Ryan waited backstage, Duke rested his chin on Ryan's knee, eyes calm. Ryan found himself reaching for Duke's fur, steadying himself, drawing courage the way he always had since that first broken night back home. The event coordinator whispered, "You're on in 5. Ryan's pulse hammered, but he stood, straightened his tie, and nodded. He stepped into the lights, applause rolling across the auditorium like thunder. Ryan blinked, searching for the right words, then let the truth spill out. "I never thought I'd be standing here," he began, voice rough but unwavering. "A few months ago, I was fighting a battle nobody could see. PTSD isn't just a word on a medical file. It's a war that follows you home. And for a long time, I thought I'd lost." He looked down at Duke, who sat tall and proud, a living testament to survival. But then came Duke. He's more than a dog. He's my lifeline. He pulled me out of burning wreckage overseas, and he pulled me out of darker places back home. He never let me give up, even when I wanted to. The room was silent, hundreds of faces hanging on his every word. "I've learned a lot about loyalty. Not the kind you put on a bumper sticker, but the kind you live through blood and tears and late-night fear. Duke never cared about my rank or my record or what the rules said. He cared about me. That's what saved my life more than once." He took a deep breath, letting his gaze sweep across the room. "But I've also learned how easily bureaucracy forgets what it means to be human. I was told Duke was property, that his future could be decided by paperwork and protocol. But loyalty isn't about contracts. It's about promises you keep, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." There was a tremor in his voice, but he didn't hide it. How we treat those who sacrificed for us and those who heal them defines us as a country. Service animals aren't just tools, and veterans aren't just case numbers. We owe them our respect, our compassion, and above all, our loyalty. A ripple of applause, low and growing. Lawmakers shifted in their seats. Camera flashes popped. Ryan pressed on. "If we forget that, if we let rules outweigh right, or let paperwork erase people, then we lose something vital, and we risk losing the very thing Duke taught me, that hope and love can survive anything if we fight for them." He paused, his heart full. "I'm not the only one. Every day, I hear stories of soldiers saved by their dogs, of families held together by an animal's quiet loyalty, of trauma eased by a friend who asks nothing in return. I'm just one voice. But together, we can be a movement. We can change the laws. We can change hearts. We can make sure nobody has to choose between following a rule and saving a life." As he finished, the room erupted in applause. Some people stood, wiping tears from their eyes. The summit's organizers rushed to thank him. Lawmakers cornered him, promising to push Duke's law through Congress. News anchors called it the speech that changed the debate. That night, Ryan sat with Duke on the steps of the Capitol, watching the city lights shimmer across the National Mall. Messages pinged in. Veterans, mothers, strangers, all promising to keep fighting. Even a few Army officials sent quiet words of support. Duke pressed his head against Ryan's shoulder, sighing contentedly. For the first time in years, Ryan felt something close to peace. He knew nothing was settled. The syndicate was still out there, the legal fight still looming, but Ryan's speech had cracked something open. A new conversation, a shift in public consciousness, a push for empathy over empty rules. And as Duke gazed up at him, Ryan realized that the real victory wasn't in winning the case or getting a law passed. It was in showing others that loyalty and love could change the world, one hard-won promise at a time. Months passed, but the impact of Ryan and Duke's story didn't fade. It rippled outward, through news broadcasts, through whispered conversations in military halls, through online communities and kitchen tables across America. The fight that had begun in a tense, rain-soaked courtroom had become a rallying cry for veterans, dog handlers, and every person who'd ever lost faith in the system but still believed in justice. Congress moved with a speed few had thought possible. After Ryan's speech at the National Veterans Summit, the push for Duke's Law became bipartisan. Lawmakers cited not just Ryan's words, but the flood of letters and emails from ordinary Americans, parents, soldiers, therapists, dog trainers, and more. Stories poured in, each one a small, undeniable reminder that bureaucracy could not measure the power of loyalty, nor legislate the depth of a bond forged in hardship. Hearings were broadcast on national television. Ryan was called to testify, this time seated at a polished wooden table beside Duke, both facing senators and representatives with the world watching. Cameras captured every emotion as Ryan told Congress what he'd told America. Loyalty isn't a contract. It's a promise, a lifeline. When you take away a veteran's service animal, you're not just following rules. You're taking their hope, their dignity, their anchor. His words landed with force. By the end of the hearings, even the most stoic politicians seemed changed. One senator, a former Army medic, wiped tears from his eyes. "We owe you," he said quietly. "We owe all of you." After months of debate and negotiation, the law passed. Retiring service dogs would remain with their handlers whenever possible. No more cold separations. No more treating lifelines like assets to be reassigned. At the signing ceremony, on a bright spring afternoon in Washington, D.C., Ryan and Duke stood at the front of the crowd, the sun glinting off Duke's now gray muzzle. When the president knelt to shake Ryan's hand, he spent a long moment scratching Duke's ears. "You saved more than one life, old friend," the president said. "You reminded us what matters most." The syndicate that had targeted Duke was eventually brought down, thanks in part to evidence uncovered during the investigation at the courthouse. Arrests were made across several states. Detective Simmons sent Ryan a simple text. "You and Duke did it. Rest easy." But victory didn't erase every scar. Ryan still woke some nights, heart racing, haunted by old explosions and fresh threats. Sometimes the world felt just as heavy, the losses just as real, but every morning, Duke was there, pushing his nose under Ryan's hand, inviting him to greet the day, reminding him that survival was not just about getting through, but about living, loving, and never giving up. Veterans began to reach out more than ever before. They invited Ryan to events, support groups, advocacy rallies. Some brought their own dogs. Others brought only memories. In every handshake, every hug, Ryan saw the difference that one story, one fight, could make. He met mothers who had lost sons to war, and fathers whose daughters had come home with invisible wounds. They told him how his courage, how Duke's courage, had helped them find their own voices. Media interest eventually faded, as it always does. But the real change was quieter and more lasting. Hospitals adjusted their policies. Military bases hosted new training for service dog partnerships. Schools invited Ryan to speak about trauma, healing, and the way loyalty can outlast even the deepest pain. Every time he stood up in front of a new group, Duke sitting at his feet, his badge gleaming, he felt the old nerves. But he also felt pride. He and Duke had not just survived. They had made a difference. One afternoon, months after the bill had been signed into law, Ryan walked Duke through a city park. It was a different kind of day. Bright, the air fresh, children laughing in the distance, the shadows no longer feeling so close. People recognized them. Some stopped to thank Ryan. Others simply nodded, as if to say, I see you. I get it. Ryan sat down on a bench, watching Duke sniff the air, tail wagging. He looked at the old dog and felt the weight of their journey, the explosions and nightmares, the courtrooms and rallies, the moments of doubt, and the rush of hope. Duke looked back, and in that gaze was the unspoken promise they'd made to each other every day. We don't quit. We don't walk away. Not from each other. Not from what's right. A young girl approached with her mother, shyly asking if she could pet Duke. Ryan smiled and nodded, watching as Duke leaned into the girl's gentle hand, tail sweeping the grass. He's a hero, the mother said softly. Ryan nodded. He saved my life, and a lot of others too. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold, Ryan thought about everything they'd been through. Not every wound had healed. Not every scar would fade. But as Duke lay at his feet, head on Ryan's boot, he knew they'd made their journey matter. He thought back to that first day in court, the loneliness, the fear, the sense that the world had already moved on. And he realized something. True heroism wasn't just surviving the battlefield, or even winning the fight for Duke. True heroism was refusing to let the world define your worth, or the worth of those you love, by a rule book written by people who had never faced your fight. He reached down, rubbing Duke's ears, and whispered, "We made it, buddy. They can write all the laws they want. Loyalty, real loyalty, is something you live every day, through hardship, through hope." And as they walked home together, the city lights twinkling ahead, Ryan knew that while the world would always have its battles, he and Duke had already won the most important one. Theirs was a story of courage, of holding on, of changing the world not by force, but by love, a bond unbreakable, a promise that would never end.